It is time to talk USC football with Chris Swanson from Trojan Sports. He joins us on a regular basis to break down the Trojans, now 4-0, following a pretty close win, despite what the box score says in the fourth quarter against Cal. Chris, how you doing tonight?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. So,
Good.
Yeah, the Cal game. So, man, the Golden Bears have to be the most improved team in the Pac-12, one of the most improved in the nation. This was a team that looked awful most of 2016, and they've knocked off Ole Miss and North Carolina. Then they get this date against USC as a 17-point underdog, and it was a tie game with about 10 minutes left. Your thoughts about USC's performance? I know that they haven't played a great team, but pretty difficult stretch considering Stanford's physical, and then, of course, Texas took them to the limit. So it's maybe understandable, the letdown on the road.
Yeah, I think so. I think Cal's a team that, like you said, they were a 17-point underdog. It's a team that a lot of people expected USC to handle. You're going on the road. It's a pretty tough environment, and Cal, like you also mentioned, is greatly improved. I don't think USC had a great performance. I think that's clear. I think that there was a chance Cal could have won that game, or it felt that way, later than it probably should have. I think there's some good to take away from the performance as well, because to me it felt like Cal, played them in an old school style football game, very physical, run first and play defense, and USC won the game. So I think that part of it bodes well for them, that they're winning games like that. The Texas game was like that. Stanford probably isn't what we thought they were, but, they won that type of game. But nonetheless, Cal, was not expected to hang with them. They shut down the USC receivers pretty well. They hung with them in the trenches and in the run game. I think a lot of people expected that USC would just run all over Cal. I think I did as well. And that didn't happen. So I think that there are reasons for concerns if you're a USC fan, but they are 4-0. So it's one of those things. Is this a team, like we've seen with Jim Tressel coached Ohio State teams, or that Jameis Winston Florida State team, where it just seems like they're winning every game close. It doesn't matter. They're going to make it to the end. Or is it reason for concern? We don't know yet, but there are reasons for concern. They're not blowing everybody out. 3 of these 4 games have been close, and, a few of them probably shouldn't have been.
We've got Chris Swanson on the lane from Trojan Sports to talk USC and Washington State. Chris, in addition to the close game against Cal, a number of players not suiting up for USC. So I don't think there's a bevy of injuries at this point, but the importance of the injuries pretty significant when you talk about the names like Ronald Jones and Porter Gustin, Stephen Mitchell.
Yeah, they have some big names out, and they hope that they get those guys back as soon as possible. I think that it could definitely make an impact in this game. If USC isn't completely healthy, I think that could definitely hurt them against Washington State, because it looks like Washington State's really dangerous and it's on the road. But, a team like USC that's in the top 5 is supposed to make it through. So it's not like Sam Darnold's injured. They still have a good backfield. They still have a good defense, and, despite these injuries. So USC should be able to pass this test if they are what people expect them to be. But it's definitely a test, especially when you're playing a team like Washington State, which everyone, should respect that team a lot.
It's USC and Washington State on a Friday night in the Pac-12, with Washington State coming in at 4-0. The Cougars with a very respectable team in the past few years under Mike Leach, but maybe trying to take that next step in the Pac-12 North, with maybe Stanford down, maybe not Oregon coming back to the extent that we had expected with the Ducks losing this past game. So it's Washington State. It's Luke Falk. That's the first name that comes to mind. 14 touchdowns, 1 interception. Unlike Mike Leach's reputation, they can actually run the ball. They don't want to, but they have Jamal Morrow and James Williams, 2 capable backs. And for some reason, Chris, even before we got into the season, even in the preseason, in looking at this schedule, this game being in Pullman on a Friday night where the weather, I don't know what the forecast is, but you can envision it not being the best, even though it is still September. It just kind of reeks of upset setting.
Yeah, No, I agree with you. I think that the odd day, it's a game that the whole nation's going to have their eyes on. I think that plays into it. Washington State, it's a smaller stadium, tough environment, and that team too. I mean, last year they almost won the Pac-12 North. With some really good teams in that division. Mike Leach, I think, is one of the better coaches in the entire country. They have one of the better quarterbacks, at least in the conference. So I think there's plenty of reasons why this game could be an upset. I think it definitely could happen. I expect it to be close at the very least. I think that Washington State, there's some matchups that they have that could give USC trouble. I really do. And I think you're right. I think before the season, people were looking at this game, and now that it's here, it seems like it's a potential trap game. And I think especially with the way, USC's performed and the way Washington State's performed, I think people are seeing it now on a more regular basis, maybe even nationwide, as opposed to just regionally.
Chris, I like your analogy to some previous successful teams that didn't look impressive to the extent that they were expected week to week, and still being successful and still getting the 10 and 11 and 12 wins and getting to the finish line, because I think we expect a little too much out of these marquee programs. Yeah. Just expect them to roll over everyone, and that the other team doesn't bring scholarship players and they're not trying to win either, because it's a difficult thing to keep up that level of play week to week. But considering we're a quarter through the season or a third through the season with 4 games out of 12, just your thoughts about maybe a player or two that has stood out. I want to let you take this in any direction you want. Just your narrative on the first 4 games, and maybe some surprises, some concerns, some things that you didn't expect.
Yeah, I think Stephen Carr is the guy that jumps out to me when you say, players that stood out. I think people knew, because of what he showed in practice, that he was going to be a special running back, and, his high school pedigree and all that. But I don't think anybody expected him to be doing what he's doing already. So he's really jumped out to me. I think that he's upgraded their backfield from very good to potentially one of the better backfields in the country, because him and Ronald Jones, that's just a dynamic duo. Sam Darnold stood out to me. I know a lot of people have been talking about his numbers and is he in the Heisman race or whatever else. But a couple of games, he's just been so impressive and he won the Texas game for them basically. So he's jumped out to me. And Christian Rector on defense, not a name that a lot of people are going to know, but he's gotten in because Porter Gustin's been injured. He's gotten playing time, and he's really jumped out when he's gotten playing time. I think he has to play. He wasn't playing before. I think he has to after, watching him this season. Uchenna Nwosu, that linebacker, I had talked to you about him before the season, so I thought he was going to be their best linebacker. I think he's their best linebacker. He's has a bunch of batted balls too this year. Like, I think against Stanford, USC said he had like 5 batted passes, which I don't even think I've ever heard of a Sam linebacker doing that before. So yeah, I mean, there's been some standouts. I know that 3 of 4 games, it seems like, have been very tough, but there's some players that have jumped out. Chris Hawkins, I think he's showing that he's an experienced safety for them, and I think he's looked good. And there's a lot of bright spots. They're still 4-0. They're still a top 5 team, and I think that you can go down the roster, down the starters, and find a lot of good. There's some concerns too, but a lot of good.
We enjoyed the USC football talk with Chris Swanson from Trojan Sports. Please join him there for the best in USC football coverage. Of course, USC, a top 5 team, as Chris mentions, 4-0, taking on a 4-0 team in Washington State, a key Pac-12 game on a Friday night in Pullman. And USC fans, if you get too comfortable with a big lead in the fourth quarter, keep in mind, I know it's not USC, but Boise State, Washington State. I had this game on, wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. It was 31-10. There's like 7 minutes left. And just something in me, having seen this a zillion times before, or a few times before, thought this game's not quite over. Crazy things happen in the Pac-12. And when you can throw it like Washington State, and sure enough, they take it to overtime and pull out a very improbable win against Boise State, again, down 3 touchdowns with about 7 minutes to play. So this should be an entertaining game. You've got kind of different offensive philosophies working here. USC more traditional, relying on the talent. Obviously, Washington State loves to space you out and throw it all over the field, and we'll see how many times Luke Falk puts it up, because his arm is used to throwing it 75 times if need be.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of the better college football games this year. That's what I expect. I expect it to be a really good one.
All right, Chris Watson talking to USC football as the Trojans prepare for the Washington State Cougars. Join him right there on Trojan Sports. Chris, we always appreciate the discussion.
Yeah, I always appreciate being here. Thank you for having me.